under the circumstances to try and get things on track within our timeline that was set forth within the project. I think we're well on our way. And I did forget to tell everybody that this was being recorded, so I will stop that. Thank you, Jessica. If I have a slight, anything I missed, Jessica's always there behind me thinking about it. So I'm in very good hands here. So I will thank you for that. So we are in the point of, we've gone back and forth to a couple of iterations of in-face interviews with UVM and online interviews due to COVID concerns and contamination precautions. So we are still on that point where interviews and the training councils or the research councils are meeting via Teams. There's been a lot of work on pilot survey stuff, which Kathy and Abby will be going over. I think overall we are in great shape moving forward. I did get a chance to listen in on the corrections and institutions testimony this morning, which involved one of our committee members, Michael Groner. And a lot of the stuff that was presented and testified to today is right along the lines of what Prin is here to do and to help look at the culture within corrections, and hopefully the data we gather, the research findings will go to add that much more proof and support to the stories being told from within the front lines and the people within corrections. So this is, I think we're at a very good position for what Prin was selected to do and what we are doing, and some of the things that are coming before the legislature now. So with that, if anybody has any comments on that before I actually turn this over to Kathy and Abby. Okay. Hearing none. All right, so I will turn this over to Kathy. I believe you're going to start with an overview of the UVM research.
Yes, so I just had to unmute, and now I'm going to share my screen. What we were planning to do today is go over, let's see, it's taking a second. All right, can you see that? Everyone? Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So what we were going to do is back up a little bit and give an overview, in part just to help Kendall, since she's joining us a little bit late, and then also just to reorient us about what we're doing. So but the main thing we're going to focus on is what we've done so far, and then I'm just going to talk for a few minutes. Anybody feel free to ask questions. I think Brad will monitor the chat if you want to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. And then Abby's going to take over in sort of an interactive exercise to help us move to the next level, which will be getting everyone's feedback to develop the next step. So just as an overview, again, mostly for Kendall. So the Prin project overview, Prin, Prison Research Innovation Network, supported by Urban Institute, funded by Arnold Ventures. 5 states DOCs were chosen, Iowa, Colorado, Missouri, Delaware, and Vermont. And each site had to pick one pilot prison that had a population of at least 300, and Vermont DOC chose Southern State. The goals are to better understand prison environments, in part so that, in order to make any sort of data-driven change, you have to understand the populations and their relationship to safety and well-being. And it's focused on both staff and incarcerated. Also to enhance the prison's data collection capacities in order to promote 2 other goals, which are transparency and accountability. And accountability is part of what the executive committee is designed to do, which is to make sure everyone is, follows through with the commitments made. And then to design and implement and evaluate programs and policies that would improve conditions for people working and living in prisons. Starting with Southern State with the idea of scaling possibly. So the timeline is two phases. We're in the middle, well, towards the end, I guess, of phase 1, which got extended because of COVID. And it involves participatory methods, meaning that Abby and I, as the independent research partners, would do interviews and focus groups with both incarcerated people and staff. And then we developed research councils, which there's one for staff and one for incarcerated. And that would be kind of an ongoing body that would provide feedback to us along the way. And so we've gotten feedback on our survey drafts and things like that. The next step, which we will be doing, we hope early March, will be the survey administration. We have developed drafts, and you should have received drafts. And we're in the process of finalizing that after getting feedback from various people. Then obviously, once we get the results, we'll analyze the data, and then there will be a data walk, which will be our presentation of our findings. And then that will also be an interactive process with the executive committee and various other stakeholders to get feedback on, what questions remain, how do we interpret the data, what does it mean, and then how to move towards what kinds of changes and innovations and how we would measure that going forward. And then the final piece is the getting the administrative data from DOC and Human Resources and other places that would help contextualize the things that we're hearing subjectively in surveys and interviews. And then in phase 2, which will begin in May, that's when, it's still a little murky because we haven't quite developed the process yet, but it will be an iterative process where DOC develops what innovations they can do, small, large, short-term, long-term, and the implementation. And then Abby and I will set up the measurements to continually assess over time and give feedback, get feedback in order to see if the changes work, if they're positive, if they need to be tweaked, and if we can roll out other ones. And that process is 3 years. So we have a good long time to really think it through and assess it. So I just wanted to mention briefly, there's a lot of themes that have come up, but if you notice in the surveys, there's certain domains that are covered. And some of these came from the Urban Institute, which across 5 sites, they want, data sharing across the 5 sites. And it's a great opportunity to have some national data from these 5 very different prison settings. But then there was space for us to develop based on what we heard in our our focus groups and interviews, what the themes were that came out. And that's one of the great things about the participatory method is rather than researchers coming in and imposing what they think the issues are, we're taking that information from the people who actually live and work in the facility. So the main staff themes that came up were, and one of the questions that Urban is asking and we're asking of both populations is what the purpose of prisons should be, what people's vision for corrections is and should be, job satisfaction. This is for staff, communication and coordination, and that really means across staff with management and then also with central office. The facility conditions, for example, how it works, staffing, their health and well-being, and their interactions or relationships with incarcerated individuals. And included in job satisfaction and staffing is things about how people are promoted and stuff like that. And then with the incarcerated individuals, we also ask them about the purpose of prisons, prison conditions, their perspective on staffing, their perspective on the facility operations, things like activities, relationships with one another, with staff, with the disciplinary process, things like that, and then also things that affect their health and well-being. So there is some convergence, and I think we talked about this last time, between what the staff think and the incarcerated folks think, which was, I thought, encouraging as a good place to start. So I want to pause for a second and see if anybody has any questions, because I went through that kind of fast. And then Abby will take over with moving to the next phase. But if anybody wants to just chat about what we've done so far, I'd be happy to answer questions.
I am not seeing any hands or hearing anything, Kathy.
Okay, great. Then I will, I'll drive for Abby, so, okay.
Perfect. So, I just want to reiterate that was like a really brief overview of about, hundreds of hours of work. And just to think about sort of stepping back, if, one of the things that Brad included in the reminder or the invite about this meeting was a memo with a lot of detailed information on this process. And so we intentionally didn't want to try to repeat everything in the memo, but I encourage everybody to take a look at that and, when they can, because it details a lot of this stuff in a little bit more, in more depth. And so if you have any questions on that at any time, don't hesitate to reach out. And then I also wanted to sort of kick us off because we have been doing a lot of work about, with that towards that goal of, collecting data to better understand the prison environments and the cultures and so forth. And we've spent a lot of time doing interviews and focus groups and working with our partners at the other states and at Urban and developing this survey and working with the folks inside the facility, the community research councils and more to actually get to this point. And so we're doing a lot of the on the ground weeds work to collect these data. So we're ready, when phase 2 starts, that it's time to start making changes, getting these data together and start making these changes. And I wanted to take a step back a little bit because in all of this work that's going on, we also want to be really intentional about how we set up the framework moving forward so that all of the work has a clear purpose and we're all on the same page in terms of what the outcomes will be and what we're striving for. And so we wanted to sort of take a minute and start introducing the language of sort of the improvement science framework and thinking about this as a way to sort of ground our approach for the measurement and the reporting moving forward. And so I just want to introduce a little bit about what the improvement science framework is. And it's a helpful way to think about change in complex systems because change in any setting is hard, but change in complex systems is extra hard. And the idea behind improvement science is when we're trying to make change, really ground it in 3 questions. What are we trying to accomplish? How will we know a change is an improvement? And what changes can we make that will result in an improvement? So if we look at that first question, what are we trying to accomplish? That's really about, clear goal setting and aims. Like, what is the aim of this project? Why are we here? Are we here to make prisons safe? Are we here to make prisons rehabilitative? Are we here to make prisons X? It's really that sort of outcome that we're all looking for. The next question, how will we know change is an improvement? Well, that's really about the measurement. If we're saying, how do we make prisons safe? How do we measure safe? And how will we know what our current level of safe is? And if we make a change, how will we know what the impact on safe is? And how will we know that what our change is what's causing that movement in safe? So that's really about that idea of measurement. How are we measuring things? And then the third idea is, well, what changes can we make that will result in improvement? So, these are the innovations. These are the processes that we can actually start changing to try to move those outcomes. So this is a framework that probably many of you have seen. It's sort of commonly used in the change process, but it really helps to ground things. And I want to reiterate that this is sort of the start of this conversation. because, you know, this is what we're going to be focusing on sort of from now, sort of moving forward. And what we want to do today is really focus on that first question. Just what are we here for? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? What are our aims? And so when we think about like what our aims are, Kathy, now you can move the slide. Sorry, I forgot about that. It's helpful to go back and think about sort of where did we start? So what was the original purpose of the Prin? So the original purpose of the Prin is to support states interested in researching and improving prison culture, operations, and design to make correctional environments more humane and rehabilitative. So it's our starting off point. This is the broad aim. Kathy, if you could move the slide. So I want to highlight this part of this statement, the make correctional environments more humane and rehabilitative. That's really the broad aim here. That's the outcome. Prisons, correctional environments, humane and rehabilitative. That's the beginning of an aims statement. Next slide, Kathy. The blue part here, improving prison culture, operations, and design, that's really about what changes we can make. You know, and we were thinking about changes to make this sort of outcome, the correctional environments more humane and rehabilitative. Researching is a way that we can go about making those changes. What changes do we do? How do we set up those systems? So what I really want to do is focus on that yellow part, the make correctional environments more humane and rehabilitative. That's the broad aim. And so when we think about this as a broad aim, it can be tough, because I think right now, if we're all in our minds thinking about, well, what do we mean by humane and rehabilitative correctional environments? Like, we might all be thinking about something different. So it's important for us to come together in terms of sort of a common dialogue about what we mean about that. Sorry, my dog is starting. My dog is starting to bark at the people outside, so I apologize if you hear weird noises. Anyway, so it's time for us to start thinking about what we mean by this. Next slide. So when we think about the purpose of setting aims, we have this broad overarching aim, but setting clear aims really helps us provide that direction and focus. It also really helps create a shared understanding of the expectations and helps us for maintaining progress. So we all know, like, are we moving towards what we all said we were going to be doing? What do we mean by this, and are we moving towards it? Having that shared definition really helps us, because one person might be thinking, we're already there, and somebody else might be thinking, we got a long ways to go. So having that shared expectation really helps us. We know that good aims are really well defined and measurable and specific. We also know that aims can be layered. So if we talked about safety, there's about 100 different layers to safety. So we can really add those layers, and we want to have lots of them. So Kathy, next slide. So if we think about our process here and the idea of making correctional environments more humane and rehabilitative, that's a great point to be starting from. So we have focus. We know we're not talking about, you know, the upstream causes of being in corrections or the downstream causes of being in corrections. We're talking about correctional environments being more humane and rehabilitative. That's our broad focus. But it's time for us to start drafting more detailed aims, so we can start setting up this process to think about, what are we trying to change? How will we measure the change? And what changes are we going to pursue? So next slide, Kathy. So the first thing to start being more specific is to start thinking about, well, what do we mean for who? You know, correctional environments more humane and rehabilitative for who? And that's clear with this process. It's for both the staff and working in the prisons, as well as the people incarcerated in the prison. So sort of our target group is there, it's staff and incarcerated folks. But then a more tricky question is, well, what do we mean by humane and rehabilitative? Next slide. So what we want to do is start to help define these broad concepts by really being clear with what our aims are. And this is where we want to start drafting those aims. The way we want to start drafting those aims is, you know, really being true to the intent of this project in terms of what are the themes that came out of the interviews and focus groups for the folks that when we were talking to the people inside the facility. You'll see this sort of word cloud over here is some of those concepts. These were the things that were identified, you know, at a broad, high level as important from the staff and the folks incarcerated in the facility. And what we want to do is consider these themes as we start to draft out what we mean for the clear aims of the project. And I just want to point out that the memo we shared on page 4 is where you can sort of see these high-level themes and the process for how they were generated. But what I want to do now is we start to draft this list, because we know that this aims list is sort of a foundation for moving the measurement piece forward, and how we're going to identify where, or a big part of the infrastructure for moving the measurement and progress of the Prin forward is really making sure we have these clear aims. And so as we start to draft this list, what we want to do is start to, we're starting it from these ideas it generated inside the facility, but we want to keep getting feedback from a broad network of stakeholders, which includes, everybody on this call and more. And so what we want to do, Kathy, if you wouldn't mind forwarding to the next slide, is we want to take about 40 minutes to get feedback from the folks on this call about what they think this means. And we want to do this in a round robin format. So basically what we're thinking is, we're taking this overarching aim of make correctional environments more humane and rehabilitative, and are starting to draft this list of what this means. It will be long. It's a draft. It's not final. It's not the definitive yes, no. It's something that will be a working draft that will happen over time with lots of feedback from different people, but it will be the thing that grounds the measurement strategy and the reporting framework moving forward. So what we want folks to do is to take a look at this. These are the kinds of themes that have come up over in this word cloud on the side. And we want folks to consider, in the context of making correctional environments more humane and rehabilitative, for you, what themes stand out as important and why? What questions does this raise for you? And what do you think is important to explore further? One of these questions over here to the left may resonate with you, or maybe all of them do, but we'd love to hear from you, and give each person about 2 minutes to talk about this and think, just respond to these prompt questions however you feel relevant is important. I want to note a couple things. We are really hoping to focus the discussion on aims, and I know that oftentimes it's really easy to shift to, we need to change this. This is the change we need to focus on. So just want to encourage everybody to resist the temptation to talking about changes that need to happen, and instead focus on outcomes like the aims, and how these concepts relate to correctional environments being humane and rehabilitative. And again, it's anyway, if you want to look at the themes in more detail, you can look at them on your memo. Otherwise, I'm going to leave this slide up. And to sort of facilitate this process, we're hoping to hear from the folks on the exec committee who we don't hear from all that often, and as well as people who work in the facility. So what I'll do is we drafted an order of people, and I can help facilitate by calling on people. And I'll put the order in the chat so you can sort of see where you are in the order, so you can start thinking about it. And I'll note that, as Brad mentioned, this conversation is being recorded. So our intention is to take notes now, as well as go back and review this, so that as we're drafting these lists, we can be, right here in the front of our mind, we can be thinking about what this group and what these people here think are important as well, and know that it's just a draft list, and our intention is to then share it back with folks to make it a continued document. So before I put the order in the chat, and we'll facilitate calling on people, does anyone have any questions about what I'm asking your feedback on right now, or any clarifying questions? I'm seeing none. So I'm going to go ahead, and I know that a lot of legislators aren't here, so my list may be outdated, but I'm going to start by calling on Tim Burgess. Tim, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and adding your thoughts, that would be great.
Well, I guess there's nothing like going first. Just kidding.
No, Tim, great. So that's why we thought you'd go first. So consider it a compliment.
So thank you. So looking at the list, or the sort of cloud you describe over here, The aims, as far as I see it, should be programming, I guess, if I were, and I'm not putting these in any specific order, but we'll start with programming. The way I sort of see it is an offender is sentenced to incarceration, and then the aim of that time while incarcerated is to focus on their criminogenic needs. So programming certainly falls within that. And it also falls within the purpose of the prison itself. You know, the aim should absolutely be to safety of both staff and inmates, the health of both staff and inmates, as we've learned in the last year or so here. Professionalism, you know, that's a tough one to call on behalf of the offenders, because there's a basic failure there there's a basic problem there with offenders coming into incarceration and expected to act professionally. However, it was my experience that more than not, staff, and I did time at Southern State, excuse me, the staff was very professional. But keeping that professionalism together when you go into overtime issues and other matters of how they feel, that can get kind of difficult. You know, it's easy for people to say that professionalism should always be there on the part of staff, but that requires offenders to understand, which I don't think is basic. It wasn't for me, that staff come in, do their jobs, and they deal with all kinds of obstacles that have sometimes little to do with the offenders and more to do with how their work environment is all the way up the chain. I hope that answered some of those.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for your thoughts. How about Representative Emmons?
What comes to my mind in looking at this for aims is communication, and that equals relationships. And then with those aims of communication relationships, then you can get to better health and safety. That's where my brain goes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And that's much appreciated. Thank you. Is Michaela on? I'm not sure I saw her pop in. I don't think so. So I think we might skip to Ashley. Did we see Ashley? Might be on mute. And I did not see Becca or Tom. Is Becca Ballant or Tom Dalton or Ashley Messier here? Groner, how about you?
I can't hear you, Mike.
Yeah.
Mike, something's wrong with your.
You've got something wrong with your audio. It's like really, really quiet.
This is what we were talking about in communication.
Brad, is there a dial-in number also associated with this Teams in case we need to get audio from some other means?
Brad, do you know if there's a call-in number that might go
There is a call-in number. I can give it to you.
Awesome.
It's 802-828-7667. Yeah, Jessica just put it in the chat. She's better than I am. Saves the day again.
Michael, if you want, do you want us to wait and have you call in, or do you want us? Okay, we'll do that. I think we're all used to technical issues now.
Hey, Abby, this is Judy Henkin. If you want, I could go next and we could stop waiting.
I think
I'm here.
Yeah, I think Michael just joined, so I think that would be. Let's let Michael go, and then we'll go for it.
Hold on, I'm getting crazy feedback from my computer and my phone. Okay, so I guess when I look at the memo, the things that jump out to me would be staffing, retention, professionalism, relationships, job satisfaction, communication and coordination, DOC vision, staff connections to central office, and the purpose of prison. I think that when you look at staff across the board in the correctional facilities, everyone, depending on their societal backgrounds, their family backgrounds, or their experience with the department, they all have a different vision of what the purpose of incarceration is, and that can lead to the mission being muddled if not everyone's on the same page. So if we can work on sort of getting everyone on the same page when it comes to that, it would probably help the conditions within the facility, along with proper staffing and trying to get the overtime to, you're never going to eliminate overtime in shift work, but if you can get it to a manageable level where people have a somewhat healthy work life or work and home life balance, that would also help us achieve our goals. I guess. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to repeat myself from earlier today with the corrections committee, but that's pretty much it. Although, when I look at the incarcerated list, I think programming and employment opportunities is something that we should probably strive to look at or improve. Speaking, from a caseworker's perspective, we don't have a lot for these guys to do currently while they're in, and that can, the old adage, idle hands are a devil's playground. It's sometimes it feels like we're not the Department of Corrections, we're more like the Department of Housing. But I think that's all I got for right this hot second, trying to stay within the 2-minute limit.
Thank you. Ashley, I know you were off. Did you want to take a turn, Ashley?
Yeah, I was off for quite a few minutes. So are we sort of discussing what our responses to this slide that's up, sort of what the making correctional environments more humane and rehabilitative?
Exactly. And just to give you just a bit of a background, is this word cloud of themes is detailed more in the memo, and it's generated from the interviews with staff and incarcerated folks in the facility, and we're using it to start the list of aims to better define that more overarching aim of making correctional environments more humane and rehabilitative. So thoughts that folks have on that would be fabulous.
And this is the piece under themes and domains, because I did read the memo.
Correct. And yes, that would be great.
I mean, I think I would definitely concur with the sort of purpose of prison, which I noticed was sort of under both staff and incarcerated folks lists. I think, you know, over the years that has really morphed into something a lot more obscure. I would say, you know, from my viewpoint, I would say relationships, but I think that that's also really important for staff, right? I think current environments are not conducive to good staff relationships and environments. And I think that that's also true for incarcerated folks where, you know, relationships aren't conducive to feeling supportive and aren't, you know, I'll use an example of substance use treatment that, you know, we attempt to provide in our facilities in Vermont for both populations. You know, the report backs that I get from incarcerated men and women is really that they don't feel like they can trust those folks because of requirements of reporting to corrections or because of, you know, punitive measures around MAT. And so that doesn't help staff to feel like they can really be as effective in those support roles. And I think that it doesn't help our incarcerated folks to feel really supported as well and maybe make as much progress around that issue as they could. I think also just, you know, looking at, I think I'm going to just speak more to the staff list too is, you know, in this word, I see the overtime really pops out to me. And, you know, as somebody that like has a family and has kids, you know, that just all of the mandatory hours that I know our corrections folks work. And then, you know, you're missing your kid's birthday yet again, and you're missing their recital, and you're missing, you know what I mean? Your anniversary with your spouse. And like, I would show up to work pissed off and stressed out too, you know, and tired. And that doesn't allow me to carry out my role in a very compassionate, supportive, or effective way either. And so if we're really thinking about, you know, making these environments more humane and rehabilitative, I would say that, you know, really focusing on some staff well-being is important. And, you know, looking at, on the other side of that, who we have in our facilities and why they're there, right? Our over-reliance on incarceration to respond to a myriad of issues, whether that's substance use, mental health, survival, and some of those pieces, I think we also really need to take a look at.
Thank you. Super helpful. Karen.
I'm always so thrilled to follow Ashley. So the thing that really sticks out to me is this issue of trauma, and because we know that everybody we incarcerate has had some experience of trauma over their lifetimes, and we're also learning more about the prevalence of trauma among people who work at the facilities as well. And so I imagine that if we had not only a trauma-informed standard of care, but also a trauma-informed workplace, that we could mitigate many of the problems that that pop up. And to do that, then that links to operations and relationships. And so, you know, I think that the relationships that exist, that's where the promise sits for transformation. And through those relationships, especially if they're trauma informed, we can take a look at operations and improve how things just operate and make that setting less traumatic or triggering for the people who are in the setting. And then I'm really intrigued by this idea of community. It makes me wonder about what the possibilities are for being in community and thinking about a prison setting as, and this is related to purpose of prison, a prison setting as more of a community rather than a place of punishment. And so that raises a lot of questions about what's possible if we were to think about prison as community and build relationships, healthy relationships within the community. So that's probably enough for now. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Super helpful. Thank you. How about David?
You know, looking at this list, it seems like a highly interconnected list, and it's hard to pull one or two of these out without feeling like everything is implicated, which I think it probably is. But when I look at them, a couple of the things that really stand out to me are ideas about what the facility and the facility conditions could and should be, both in terms of physical conditions and also opportunities within the facility with respect to programming and education. Before I was with the Attorney General's office, I was a public defender for a number of years and represented folks who were in for a time. And with one person in particular, I really remember the educational opportunities being really something that changed things for them in a really significant way. And that has always stuck with me. And I think that that's something that should be it should really be an integral part of how we think about a facility like this. And the other piece I think is staffing and the various aspects of that: working conditions, opportunities, professionalism, who you're getting to join the staff is all incredibly important. So those are the understanding this all feels like very interconnected web. Those are two things in particular that stand out to me.
Thank you. Mike Lyon.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. You know, sitting here listening to the comments, everybody's spot on. The reality is, though, if you look at that collage of things and you drew a little animated character and put that in our brain, that's my life every day. That's what I deal with on many different facets at just about every one of those issues played out. I'm sure Al could speak to this, or even Commissioner Baker at some level. So it's hard for me to pick out one or two. That's our world. That's what we deal with every day at some level. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. It's complex.
Thank you. Lori Ammons.
Yes. As I look at the list, really great points that were brought up for both staff themes and incarcerated individuals themes. But a couple did stand out for me. Interactions with incarcerated people. To me, as a previous staff member, you know, in other systems, identifying those unmet needs, you know, and being a clinician within this environment, I think can really be a positive thing. Once an individual can understand what those needs are, then that can really lead to really strong engagement with an incarcerated individual into their programming and into their treatment. And so with that professional relationship that's established with, you know, through those interactions, that's just really a strength. I think if that can be a focus. The other thing regarding incarcerated individuals that I thought a couple of those stood out for me, purpose of prison. That's one that I've thought about thousands of times for different individuals. Establishing some kind of plan where the incarcerated individual agrees, you know, this would be the goals of the incarceration, what they need to focus on, what would they need to accomplish, or what would they even want to accomplish during that time, I think is extremely important and can help to lead to positive change if needed. And being in the healthcare business, the health and well-being, you know, I think is definitely important. Focusing on Are we providing a community standard of care? Are people engaging in their own health and wellness and care? And so those are the couple of items that stood out for me and are important, I believe.
Thank you. I don't think I saw Sarah George join the call, but I know Kendall's. Oh, so Sarah, jump in if I'm wrong. But I know that Kendall's here, so Kendall, would love to hear from you.
Hi, all. Apologies. Just that's my cue, right, Abby? That you're
That's
ready for me? Okay.
Yeah,
Just
and
making sure.
don't worry about the kids in the background. I've got
Thank
dogs.
you. So, listening to this conversation and staring at the statement, make corrective environments more humane and rehabilitative, where my mind first went was that the humanity piece needs to be the baseline, and we have to tackle that before we can tackle the rehabilitative piece of this work. And so whether that is appropriate staff scheduling, whether that is safety, whether that is what the facilities look like, that needs to be the most important piece first before the prison or the facility can be rehabilitative. When I think about the aim of rehabilitation, the first thing I think about is the individual getting what they need, so when they hopefully eventually exit incarceration, they don't re-enter the criminal justice system. And some others have spoken about the programming piece already, and different aspects of that, and what it could look like or what goes into that work in terms of wraparound supports. So I won't rehash what others have already shared, but I guess my little bit of my different take was that we should be focusing first almost as an implicit baseline that the prison for both the staff and those there are humane environments before they can become rehabilitative.
Thank you. And I don't think I saw Senator Sears join, so I will pass it to Al.
Thank you, Abby. So as I look at this list, I look at, to Kendall's point, humanity being at the top of the list. I don't think we can have a humane environment without humanity. And then from there to empathy, I think there's a fine line between compassion and accountability, and that's where I think empathy comes in. And in a prison environment, you need both compassion and accountability. And to Mike Lyon's point, this is every day in a corrections world. The unfortunate part is we get tunnel vision and focus on one thing, two things, three things, and we're not looking at everything with 100%, and we're not always looking at it with a positive eye. I know we get frustrated. We talked about the overtime. We talked about the staffing shortages. People get frustrated and they focus on the negativity of the staffing. They focused on the negativity of the operation. They focus on negativity of the relationships and the negativity or the lack of trust. So I think if we focus on humanity and empathy and understanding other people's shoes, I think that leads to the well-being and that health and safety in our environment. So we have to take it all into account, but without humanity, we've got nothing. And we really have to pay attention to each other and both sides of the coin with that. And the other thing that I think is missing off here is, I've read it numerous times trying to find it, but inclusivity. I think we need to be inclusive of everybody. And I think we've struggled with that too. So those are my thoughts.
Great, thank you. Judy, I'd like to invite you to say something you mentioned earlier. So Judy?
Hi, yeah, I think it's a very similar theme that Al was just saying. When I look at this, I tended to focus on some of the things that I kind of think cross over both resident and employee more. And I looked at community and trust and empathy and humanity and well-being and communication. And I think that's all back to now at this point. maybe it was, well, someone was saying about being a community and looking at these facilities different than what maybe captives and captors almost as was a traditional way of looking at things. So I would focus on the trust, the empathy, the community building, the humanity piece of it. But they all, as David had said, they all do connect. And you could look at this and say, oh, and then it includes, well, that's health. And then there's, but they do connect, because I think that's where, you know, community, it's a connectivity between all the folks that are involved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Baker, do you want to say something?
Please, Abby, thank you. I'm sorry I had to get off for a few minutes to cover an issue, and I apologize that I missed the first part of this, and I know it's recorded, so I'll catch up. So Abby, thank you for calling me out. And everybody that's working on this, you know, coming into corrections from the outside, I cannot emphasize how important this is. So Abby, when I wasn't quite sure what this, I'm kind of picking up on what the idea of the round robin is, right? But I want to echo a couple things that have already been said. What Mike Lyons said. This is the most chaotic environment I've ever worked in, and that, you know, I've been around longer than I should be around, working in state government, and so I want to emphasize what Mike Lyons said and what Al said, and the deputy just touched on it. When I look at the slide and I see those words, that's our life every day. It's just going from one brush fire to another. And I want to try to break it down from my perspective and what getting down to the piece of humanity. And I got back on just when Ashley was finishing up, and I want to reemphasize what Ashley said, what Karen said, and what everybody said. Early on in coming into corrections, I said to Al one day, it seems to me that the jails are like a series of neighborhoods. And in those neighborhoods inside a city, Southern States Correctional Facility to me is a city. It provides housing, food, security, medical care, programming, like school, no different than any other community. And it seems to me that the blocks in the facilities are neighborhoods where you have people that have a certain amount of credibility and other folks that don't have credibility. And the security staff, I know it's not policing, but coming from my policing background, I think of it as policing. And for me, this is where you start getting into what Karen and Ashley were talking about. Our staff, I believe, after being here a year, are incredibly traumatized from the nature of what they do and this forced overtime. And so it's this vicious cycle of being on a treadmill and just pushing it faster and faster and faster. And we're going nowhere because people don't stay long enough because they can't put up with the overtime and the other conditions. So we're forcing more people to work more overtime, traumatizing them, keeping them away from their families. Some of the behavior that I've talked about openly in the legislature and other places can be attributed to this. It's an enormous amount of stress that we put them under. And then when they come to the facility, I just came on as Ashley was saying this, and I agree with her. I mean, if you're forced into an overtime situation where you had plans for your daughter's birthday party, you know, I know this is not what commissioners are supposed to say, but I'll repeat what Ashley said. Of course, you're going to come into work pissed off. And then it gets into the whole procedural justice piece of how we use procedural justice inside the facilities between our staff and the inmate population. And then let's not even talk about trying to implement restorative justice because it's just chaos. And so the neighborhoods inside the facilities, from where I see, operate on this, you know, chaotic situation. And it's a credit to everybody, the staff and the inmates, that we don't lose control of a facility like a neighborhood gets lost. And so to get all the way down to the humanity, we have to fix some of these other issues. And instead of, you know, if it's me as the leader of the agency, I shouldn't be calling anybody out publicly. And I would hope that no one calls me out publicly, right? There's that concept of calling people in and not calling people out. And I think that's part of what some of the change in the culture has to be. We have to call people to the table. I've said this to staff often. When we have a disagreement, if someone doesn't really care what I'm doing as the commissioner, it's really hard to hate each other when you're sitting at a table having a conversation. So calling people in becomes important and not calling them out. And I think the reason why I'm so excited about the work you're all doing is I think you're heading down that path. And not only do we have to support the inmates that are traumatized, we have to support our staff that's traumatized. And I think we're doing a better job of that now, but that's not the purpose of this. But I'm just trying to paint the picture when I look at this slide about how chaotic that slide is. And I think about my days every day. And Mike Lyon, and I'm not even on the ground like Mike Lyon. You know, I'm not worrying about going home today and making sure that the shifts are staffed over the weekend through the holiday on Monday. Mike's doing that. And so that's my view, Abby, and I appreciate the fact that you called on me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to wrap up a few things and also offer people the chance if they'd like to say something else, or folks that didn't speak would like to speak, just to raise your hand, and we'll call on you from there if you'd like to recomment or add to your thoughts. But I want to touch on how helpful this was as we go through this. Mainly, something that stands out for me is the complexity of all of this, and the things that you've all said, you know, bring me right back to some of the conversations we had with folks during our interview and focus group process about exactly this, and how hard it is to stay focused on one thing because everything's interconnected. And I think that's one of the things we're really trying to achieve here is we know it's complicated. We know there's a lot going on, and if we move one dial, it'll have ripple effects, some positive and some negative, and really how we set this up so that we can think about it with sort of these clear aims, and then think about, well, where are we trying to make changes, and then really study to see where was the impact, and if we make this one change, can we have an impact on 10 areas versus one, and where do we draw those lines, and how do we understand those interactions? And so, James Baker, go for it.
I'm sorry to do this, Abby, because I forgot one thing that I think is really important, and this is something that I think is very important about the way our correctional system is looked at in the state. In all that chaos is the fact that sometimes the staff, especially the security staff, not so much probation and parole in the field, but we're talking about the facilities. Sometimes I don't think they get the credit they deserve of what the role they play in the justice system in Vermont. And many times corrections officers are a second thought in many conversations. And I think it's important because I think it's the way, you know, you're going to act the way you feel. And if you feel like you're undervalued, then you're going to act like you're undervalued. And I just thought I'd add that. I forgot it when I got off on a tangent there earlier. So thank you for calling on me again.
No, it's helpful, and thank you. And again, this is a space for folks to talk about things like that. And again, this is what we'll do is take this information, listen to this recording, and sift through and really try to highlight these themes as we start drafting these aims, and share that document back with everybody, and for that purpose. So Kathy, if you want to move to the next slide.
Before we do that, Tim had his hand up, and I just wanted to make sure he had the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, sorry for not seeing you, Tim. Yes.
That's no problem. Tim hit the wrong button.
Okay.
Hey.
Okay. So a couple things I want to point out are, as we are thinking about these aims, you know, these aims are really sort of the outcomes that we're sort of defining and looking for. And as we move to further conversations, you know, how we measure those outcomes and how we see if we're having an influence on those, you know, depends on the things we measure. So it's really important that we get that measurement strategy right. And a lot of that work has gone into sort of the development of these surveys. And so I want to just point people to the draft surveys that were included in that exec memo at the end, and try to look at those if you can, and see if you see some of those themes that resonated with you coming through in in those, because that's where we're really tried to represent sort of the way we're measuring some of these outcomes. And the way we developed those surveys was, in partnership, was really coming from the interviews and focus groups. What were the themes that generated from sort of the folks who live this and breathe this every day? What are the things that are important inside? And then, raising that up and then saying, time to measure this. How do we do this? And how do we take it from, an in-depth perspective of 30 people to a much broader perspective? So our plan is to administer these surveys in SSCF in March. And so given sort of the institutional review board process that needs to happen, we're really pushing to get them finalized over the next couple weeks. So a gentle request would be, if you have feedback or comments on those surveys, if you could send them to us by January 22nd, that would be great. Another thought is, we'd love people to continue being part of the conversation with defining these aims. These are things that will come up again as we sort of ground conversations moving forward. But we are definitely going to work on drafting that document soon, and we'll invite everyone to continue commenting on that. And then also, as you read through things, or you just, something might pop into your head at any time. If you have any questions at all or any comments on process, timing, domains, themes, anything, please reach out. We definitely want to talk to folks and hear your thoughts. So those are our homework. So finally, I just want to say, again, this is the beginning of a conversation, and we are really wanting to be just aware that what we really focused on today was that Prin goal 1. So we know that there's sort of 3 core goals of the Prin, and those are, again, more detailed in that memo. But we talked a lot about the data collection, and that memo details a lot of sort of the stuff we're doing in terms of data collection to better understand the prison environment and the relationship to safety and well-being for those who are in the prisons and working and incarcerated in the prisons. And we also really started this discussion to ground, what are we hoping to accomplish? How do we set this common goal? How can we meet that together? Next time when we get together, we want to continue this dialogue, but really focus on that second goal of, enhancing prisons' data collection capacities to promote transparency and accountability, and shift to the second point of the improvement framework. And how will we know if a change is an improvement? That's really focused on what we're measuring, and how are we defining things to the point where it's measurable. And then that's good timing, because we're sort of set up for when phase 2 kicks off in May. And we start talking about a data-driven approach to identifying and implementing change. And what changes can we make, and what will result in improvement, and where can we get the greatest leverage, and how can we use this measurement framework to really understand the complexity and the interactions in all of these things we're doing. So really moving into sort of that designing, implementing, and evaluating evidence-based programs once we get to May. So that's sort of where things are headed, and how we'll use the information that you guys all shared today. So that's all I have. Encourage any questions or comments or thoughts. We're good.
Okay. Well, thank you, Abby and Kathy, for that.
I think Kathy has her hand up. Kathy, give your hand up.
Yes. Sorry, I just had one comment that I think might help orient people. It helps me to think about this way, in terms of how you would define what is a humane environment. It's kind of like, it when you see it, maybe. So I guess the question is, if you walked into a prison and you said, wow, this is a really humane environment, what would the features be that you would notice that would make you determine that that's a humane environment? What would be the things you would be looking for that would indicate some sort of humanity? And I think if people, it's a hard question, really hard question, but if people can begin thinking about that and articulating it, then we can go from there. So that's all I had.
Okay. And there's some thank yous in the chat to both you, Kathy and Abby, if you want to take a read of that. That's the last slide showed some dates. I just want to reiterate the next executive board meeting committee meeting is slated for March 19th, same time, 2 p.m. A May one has not been selected yet because we're hoping to wait to see. I'd love to have it in conjunction with the data walk as well, and somewhere around there. So I really am hesitant about penciling in a date for that executive committee meeting in May. I'd like to wait until we get more a little closer and understand where we are after the climate survey has been implemented and analyzed, and Kathy and Abby have some data to share with us. That being said, we have plenty of time, and I'd love to hear any other general discussions and observations or questions or where we'd like to move. I will say, going back to what the commissioner hit on, the facilities being a community, the last 4 months of being here and observing the facility in work, that is absolutely observations that I am seeing. That's conversations that Mike Lyon and I have daily. There's a lot of research out there on the policing side on how to engage communities, and there's some conversations and some data pertaining to that I've been reading into and looking into, and hopefully we'll be able to incorporate that in looking at the next March meeting, that the data issue. As a side mission, I've been looking at a lot of other data capacities and our data debt in corrections of just some things we might not be collecting, or we're collecting, we just don't know we have, or we're collecting it and not in a useful means, whether it be on paper or in a Excel spreadsheet that's not shared with everybody. So we are moving forward on a complementary tangent with Prin on looking at some data and some of the issues that corrections has. But I will stop there and open it up to general discussions. Tim.
Yeah, I just want to say that to the commissioner, to Al, that analysis of the units being neighborhoods is one of the best I've really heard. And, you know, to that end, there are sometimes within correctional facilities, there are people who are just not happy in their neighborhood, and they're not happy with the way their life is treating them. And that's where I really see staff being sort of, if you will, the traffic cop, and saying, you know, you don't like this neighborhood, but this is where you are. And one of the things that I think gets often overlooked, especially with all the craziness in the political world and in the community in general, is that police officers, it's not generally taken into account how police officers' lives are outside of the uniform. So I just wanted to speak up to that and say thank you, Commissioner. That was a pretty in-depth analysis. Thanks.
You're welcome, Tim. And I appreciate you, Tim, for your insight that you bring to us often. Thank you.
Anybody else? I'm open to entertain anything because I've got 43 minutes left on this. Okay, going forward, not seeing anything. I would like to thank everybody for taking the time out to attend today. Oh, I see Jesse. Jesse, go ahead.
I mean, I just wanted to say, congratulations to Abby and Kathy, to all the staff at Southern who are involved in this, to Mike, to the leadership, from Jim and Al and Monica. It has been an extremely difficult year on every front, and it's really exciting to have, all that you've already been able to, surface and learn from, the staff and the incarcerated folks, to have survey instruments in draft. I mean, I think if you had told me, like, when we were out there in February, what was going to happen in the coming months, I would have been astounded by what you all have been able to accomplish. And, and I know it's taken a lot, and there's a lot else going on. And it's just, it's exciting, and I think it's really commendable. And even on a personal note, I'll say that, being in the nation's capital region, it's been a tough couple of weeks, just like pretty, disturbing, depressing on a lot of fronts, and not sure what's going to come. And I think it's really helpful to be able to be in spaces like this where people are trying to do good work, guided by real values, figure out how to harmonize different perspectives they're coming from. And so, like, even on a personal level, I really appreciate that. And it's a helpful way just for me to end the week is being in this group and talking about what y'all are doing.
All right. Thank you, Jesse. Again, yes. The work done in a compressed amount of time has been amazing on both sides of the team. I know our data personnel in DOC has been putting in some amazing amount of hours as well to pull out some extracts, and I'm not going to break anything, but I understand that there's a huge extract coming, so Kathy and Abby should be excited about that. All right. Anybody else? Let's see. Is something in the chat room? Take care in DC. Everybody take care in DC down there in Urban. Okay. So going forward, if there's any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I've got a few things on my list to reach out to some of you on some other matters. I do want to say, as soon as things start breaking, I'm a coffee kind of guy, and I hope to at some point meet with each and every one of you for the beverage of your choice, and that includes the Urban team. It's only, DC is only a 7.5 hour drive for me, so no problem. Water, coffee, tea, cocoa, whatever it is, I really wish, I do want to make that connection, and at some point come out and sit down with each and every one of you as we move forward through the next couple of years. So anything else for the good of the order? Seeing none, I thank everybody for joining us, and have a wonderful holiday weekend.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Have a great weekend, folks.